it's not actually studying if you're not retaining any information. Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Be Me Queen, and today I'm going to be telling you guys my best study tips and hacks for STEM majors that actually work. In this video, I'm going to tell you about all of the items that you need to get started, all of the tactics that I used in college, and then some of the resources that are available here on YouTube that you can use to study this semester. First things first, you're going to need the right equipment to get started with studying, and the equipment that I used when I was studying in college was clear post-it notes. So those are linked in the description box. If you've never heard of clear post-it notes before, let me know in the comments by writing post-it notes. And I also use a set of different color highlighters as well as different color gel pens. And I'm going to tell you how I use these items in future tactics, but all of these items are in my back to school list, which is linked in the description box below. First study tip that was super helpful for me was rewriting my notes after class. This takes a lot of effort, and that's a part of studying. You have to put in the effort to get a reward, aka good grades. But the reason why this works so well for me is because when I was in class, I was typically writing notes along with watching the presentation on PowerPoint from my professor. And even though I was writing notes, it was too fast, and a lot of times I was writing too quickly and I didn't get all the details from the notes. So what I would do is I would open up the presentation again from my professor that emailed us the different notes from the class, and then I would rewrite the notes based on what I'd already written from the day of class. I would compare those notes and make sure I got all the details by rewriting them. I would also take this opportunity to write them in different colors using the different color gel ink pens that I have. So any points that were either difficult for me to understand or I wanted to ask a question about, I would put in a separate color. And then anything that I thought would be really important or the professor had mentioned might be on a future exam, I would put in another color, say purple. All the regular notes would be in one color, let's say blue. It's an easy way for you to keep track of your notes by color coding them as you're rewriting them from the class prior. Second tip that I would do, and you're going to use your clear post-it notes for this, is to draw diagrams and make charts to organize the information in your mind. I am a very visual person. I need to have a diagram or some type of cartoon to make sense of the different concepts that we were discussing in class. The way I would go about studying this is I would take those clear post-it notes and put it over the textbook, and then I would trace the diagram on that clear post-it note and the different color markers or ink pens that I had, and I would create my own diagrams. Once you're done tracing over that diagram with that post-it note, you can just take the post-it note off and put it on your actual notes or your study sheet. Sometimes I would even go ahead and make my own diagram in different colors. That way it was like color coded in my mind, and this really helped me as a visual learner because if I were taking an exam, I could visualize the diagram that I had traced, post-it note, or had drawn on a separate sheet. And that helped me remember all the different tactics or the processes that we were talking about in that class or for that exam. So the post-it notes are super helpful for this, especially the clear ones. However, you can use lighter colored post-it notes, so anything that's like a pale yellow, those will work as well. Or just like white, you can hold it up into the light and try to trace it that way. That is a really cool trick to not only get the diagrams, but also insert it into your notes so that you have a picture that goes along with the words or the bullet points that you've written in your notes. The third thing that I would do is tons and tons of practice problems from my textbook and from my professor. For my math-based classes, so anything that involves calculus or I'm just doing any type of equations, I would look at all the practice problems that the professor had given me and I would try to do them on my own. I would also repeat the practice problems that we did in class. I would do those on my own to see if I actually understood the process, not just the math, but the process of solving that problem. If the professor didn't give out practice problems, I would go to office hours and I would ask for additional practice problems, or if they knew of any other textbooks that may have practice problems that I could do. Another way to do this is by going on YouTube and looking for practice problems in that topic, and you can follow along with the instructor on YouTube to see if you understand the process, again, not just the math, but the process, and if you can do it on your own following the process steps. So a lot of people, especially STEM majors, get caught up on not knowing math, or they're kind of intimidated by the math. But as long as you have the process correct, most professors will give you partial credit for understanding the process, even if you don't get the math right. So it's really, really important that you understand step 1, step 2, step 3. Also, a lot of classes that require you to do math allow you to have calculators. Doing the math itself is not really a hard feat, but you want to make sure that you understand how to solve the problem from start to finish, what to do in certain situations, and how to tackle a problem, also have certain variables, etc., etc. Another thing that I would do is I had a very specific tactic when I made my study sheets, and study sheets are so important in STEM majors because you typically get a study sheet, so an 8.5 by 11 page, and your professor will allow you to write either one whole side or double-sided study sheets that you can bring to your exam with you. This is super important, and this was my tactic for my study sheets. On one side of my sheet, or on the top half of my study sheet, I would put any type of definitions or concepts that could be written in words, and I would color code it by the topic. For example, in my qualitative anatomy course, I would have cardio in red, and then I would have skeletal systems in purple, and I would have all those facts organized that way on my study sheet. Then on the second half of my study sheet, or on the back side of it, I would have practice problems as an example, but I would write the steps out without the math. So if the practice problem asks you to, let's say, solve a triple integral, then I would have the integral at the top, and then I would have step 1, do this, and then I would kind of write like an example of it, and I would do step 2, do this, and I'll write an example of it. I would basically give myself the steps of how to solve that specific problem, practice problem, but I wasn't so focused on the math itself. I was more so focused on the process and how to go from start to finish to get through the problem. Those were super important to put on my study sheets, because a lot of times the exam questions were almost identical, not identical in numbers, but identical in process for how to solve that practice problem. I would also make sure that any equations that were on my study sheet, I would have a list of defined variables and the units for that variable. For this really long equation, I would have it written out at the top, and then at the bottom, I would have all of my variables and then what types of units I could expect those variables to be in. This is super helpful when you have to go solve a practice problem, because your units have to match up. A lot of times I had a hard time remembering pressure unit, so I would put PSI or ATM or whatever pressure units existed. I would put that next to it so that I could remember, like, okay, this variable they gave me in the practice problem is pressure, so I need to know that for a practice problem just in case it comes up. Last but not least, I would have a separate section of like helpful hints, is what I called it. Helpful hints section was for me to recognize where I'd messed up in the past and how to correct it for the future. Let's say I forgot to convert my units in a previous practice problem. I would go to my helpful hints section when I was making my study sheet. I would write, don't forget to recheck your units. So I had an entire section of just helpful hints, and they were really just reminders to myself that I could correct previous mistakes that I had made, and that I wouldn't do those mistakes on the exam. As I was doing the exam and I would look at my study sheet for the different topics, I would then go to that topic and I would either write out the information, all the facts or something about cardio, for example, and then I would do like a cardio practice problem. And then once I was done with that practice problem on the exam, I would go to my study sheet. I would look at all of my helpful hints section and cross off and make sure that I did that for the cardio problem on the exam, and then I'll move on to the next part of the exam. So it's really critical that you don't make the same mistakes you did before, and that was my way of making sure that I corrected myself in every single problem. Last but not least, these are the YouTube channels that I watched that were super helpful for me to learn concepts in my engineering courses. So my professors were not that great at explaining different concepts in ways that I could understand, so I always went to YouTube to look for channels that could teach you different concepts and also do more practice problems. Those channels were Khan Academy, and the other channel that I watched all the time was Crash Course. So for Khan Academy, you can get a lot of practice problems and you can get a lot of really in-depth explanations up to medical doctor terms. That was super helpful, especially when I was taking organic chemistry. The Crash Course was a way for me to understand the general general scope of the concept that my professor was trying to explain. Something like action potentials, I will watch a crash course video on it. Although it doesn't give you all of the details in that video, it does provide a great foundation for you to understand general purpose of action potentials and how they fire, how they work. So I would use Crash Course to understand the general concepts, whereas I would use Khan Academy to understand the nitty-gritty details and to also get practice problems for different subjects and different topics, all within the STEM umbrella. I would do this for biology, physiology, calculus, qualitative physiology, the immunology I will also do it for. So there were a ton of courses that I use both of those YouTube channels to check and make sure that I was on the right track and understanding the concepts as well as understanding the practice problems. That is it for all of my study tips for STEM majors. I hope this was really helpful for you. If you found this video to be really helpful, let me know by giving it a thumbs up, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.